The eviction notice came as a shock to everyone, but perhaps no one more than Sarah herself. It wasn't just the suddenness of the action, it was the cold, impersonal way in which it was delivered. The HOA had always been a source of tension in the community, but no one ever imagined it would come to this. Sarah had been a model tenant and a well-loved member of the neighborhood, someone everyone could count on. Yet here she was, standing on the doorstep of her home, holding an eviction notice that threatened to turn her world upside down. The letter from the HOA wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a declaration of war against her family's home. It demanded that Sarah remove certain plants from her garden, a patch of greenery she had carefully nurtured over the years. These plants were not just any plants. They had been chosen and planted by Sarah alongside her late mother, who had passed away a few years earlier. For Sarah, these plants symbolized the love, guidance, and strength her mother had given her. The flowers were more than just decorations. They were the living memory of the woman who had shaped her into the person she was today. In fact, Sarah's whole garden had a sentimental value. Every corner of it told a story, every leaf and bloom had a connection to her past. The idea that she had to remove them was devastating, not just on a physical level but on an emotional one. To her, it felt like erasing the very essence of her mother's presence. Her first response was to reach out to the HOA, to explain her situation. She spoke to several members, pleading for understanding, and explaining the sentimental significance of the plants. She asked for an exception, or at the very least, a compromise that would allow her to keep the plants in place. She even offered to meet the HOA halfway, suggesting alternative ways of complying with their regulations without losing the memory of her mother's garden. But the HOA refused to listen. The letter remained firm and unyielding, enforcing the rules without taking into account her personal situation. It was clear that to them, the regulations were the only thing that mattered. There was no room for compassion, no space for empathy. The rules were the rules, and they had to be followed to the letter. Sarah's neighbors were horrified when they heard the news. They couldn't believe what was happening. Many of them knew Sarah personally, and they had seen firsthand the care and love she put into her home and her garden. How could the HOA be so heartless, so out of touch with the human element? The neighborhood had always been known for its sense of community, where neighbors helped each other, where people took pride in their homes, and where family values were held in high regard. To turn their backs on Sarah during such a critical time seemed unjust and unkind. The shock was compounded by the fact that Sarah was pregnant. She wasn't just facing the loss of her garden and home, she was facing it at a time when she needed peace and stability the most. Her due date was fast approaching, and she had no family nearby to lean on. Her fiancé, Mark, was supportive but also caught up in the chaos of trying to figure out what their next steps would be. They had no idea where they would go. With the eviction notice looming over them, their options were limited. Sarah felt trapped. She couldn't afford to lose her home, especially with a baby on the way. She had nowhere else to turn. The idea of packing up and moving while carrying a child seemed impossible. But what was even more crushing was the sense of helplessness that came with it. She had been a model neighbor, a kind and giving person, and yet she was being treated as though she were a mere nuisance, just another rule violator to be pushed out of the community. As Sarah stood there, clutching the eviction notice, she realized that the situation wasn't just about plants or landscaping. It was about something much deeper, her sense of belonging, her place in the world, and her dignity. She wasn't just fighting for her home, she was fighting for respect, for the recognition that her life, her memories, and her family mattered. The decision to evict her, in her mind, wasn't just an attack on her property, it was an attack on everything she had worked for and loved. Her neighbors, witnessing her struggle, began to rally around her. They couldn't stand by and watch the HOA bully a pregnant woman out of her home. Many of them began to question the HOA's motives. What kind of system could enforce such cold, heartless policies? Why wasn't there room for compassion in a place where community was supposed to be everything? The more they thought about it, the more they realized this wasn't just Sarah's fight, it was their fight, too. It was time for them to step in and take action. The HOA had crossed the line, and it was clear that the community would not let them get away with it. This wasn't just about a few plants in a garden. This was about standing up for what was right, about showing that compassion and understanding still had a place in society. As word spread, more and more neighbors began to come forward, offering their support in any way they could. Together, they were ready to take on the HOA, and they wouldn't stop until Sarah was allowed to stay in her home. The injustice of the situation had united them, and now it was time to make their voices heard. ChatGPT said, as Sarah's eviction deadline grew closer, she felt the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Her anxiety was compounded by the fact that she was heavily pregnant, and the emotional and physical toll was beginning to show. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds stacked against her, Sarah refused to succumb to the pressure. Her determination only grew stronger with each passing day. This wasn't just about her home. This was about her family, her dignity, and the future she wanted to create for her unborn child. She would not let an unjust system dictate the course of her life. The HOA had immense power. They had a legal team that seemed invincible, lawyers who were skilled at making people's lives miserable. They had a history of evicting residents for minor violations, enforcing their strict rules with no regard for personal circumstances. They seemed untouchable, operating like a well-oiled machine, with each move calculated to ensure they got what they wanted, no matter the human cost. But the HOA didn't account for one thing: Sarah's resilience and the power of a united community. Sarah knew she couldn't fight the HOA on her own. She didn't have the same resources or financial backing that they did, but what she did have was something more valuable than money. She had the unwavering support of her neighbors. From the moment Sarah's eviction notice went public, the community rallied around her. It was as if a switch had been flipped, and what had once been a neighborhood of polite nods and brief exchanges now became a collective force, determined to bring justice to Sarah and her family. Neighbors who had previously kept to themselves began visiting Sarah's house, offering emotional support and brainstorming ways to stop the eviction. The group started collecting signatures for a petition that demanded the HOA reverse their decision. It didn't take long for the petition to gather hundreds of signatures, and with each new name, the momentum grew. People who had never met Sarah before were signing, recognizing that this wasn't just about one woman's fight, but about the very fabric of the community they all shared. But the support didn't stop at petitions. People began showing up outside the HOA's office, organizing protests. They held signs that read "Stop the eviction" and "Let Sarah stay." The once quiet neighborhood was now buzzing with activity, as more and more residents joined the effort to demand that the HOA reconsider its decision. They were tired of watching their community get torn apart by bureaucracy and selfishness, and they were determined to stop it before it was too late. Sarah herself had been passive at first. She had tried to be compliant, working with the HOA in good faith, attempting to find a solution that would allow her to stay in her home while also adhering to their rules. But as the situation worsened, Sarah realized that if she didn't take a stand, she would lose everything. Her fight was no longer just about the garden or the house. It was about making sure that no one else in the neighborhood would have to endure what she was going through. She decided to take a more proactive approach. Sarah began collecting records of the HOA's previous unfair actions, instances where they had evicted or fined residents for trivial reasons. She unearthed stories of other families who had suffered at the hands of this overbearing organization. Armed with this evidence, she reached out to the local media, telling her story in the hopes of shining a light on the injustice she was facing. Within days, Sarah's story was all over social media. News outlets picked it up, and soon her plight was being discussed on TV news, local radio stations, and even across national platforms. People were outraged by the unfairness of her eviction, and the more they learned about the HOA's history of heavy-handed tactics, the more they joined the fight. Her story wasn't just a local issue, it became a national cause, and Sarah quickly became the face of resistance against oppressive HOA rules. The public outcry grew louder and louder. It wasn't just about Sarah's eviction anymore, it was about the wider problem of HOA overreach and the way they trampled on the rights of ordinary people. People began to see the bigger picture. If the HOA could do this to Sarah, they could do it to anyone. And as the pressure mounted, the HOA realized they couldn't ignore the situation any longer. The media coverage was relentless, and the community was united in their fight to protect Sarah's home. Despite the mounting stress, Sarah remained steadfast. She was determined to hold the HOA accountable for their actions. But it wasn't just about winning this battle, it was about showing the world that human decency and compassion should always come before rigid rules and regulations. In the face of adversity, Sarah and her neighbors had proven that when people stand together, they can challenge even the most powerful systems. It was a fight for justice, and it was one that Sarah would not back down from. Sarah's final move stunned everyone, especially the HOA. It wasn't just a last-ditch effort to hold onto her home, it was a calculated and bold statement to everyone who had doubted her. The time for legal wrangling and protests had passed. Sarah knew that the only way to truly make her mark, to ensure that this injustice didn't repeat itself, was to do something they'd never expect. She wasn't going to leave quietly. She was going to leave her mark on this community and show the world that no matter how small or powerless one may feel, standing up for what's right can make a difference. On the final day before her eviction, Sarah did something truly extraordinary. She transformed her front yard into an emotional farewell celebration. But it wasn't just any farewell, it was a massive event filled with color, life, and purpose. She invited every single neighbor who had supported her in her fight, and even those who had initially remained silent but couldn't ignore the injustice once it reached its peak. The event wasn't just about her leaving, it was about celebrating everything that had been achieved in the face of adversity. The yard was covered in vibrant balloons, banners that read unity and community, and music that filled the air, setting the tone for a day of celebration rather than defeat. As neighbors mingled, Sarah was at the heart of it all, smiling, talking, and reflecting on how far they had come as a community. But the most poignant moment of the day came when Sarah took a spade and started planting a new garden right there in front of her house. This garden was no ordinary one, it was a symbol of everything she had fought for and everything the community had stood for. Each flower she planted represented something unique, a different neighbor, a different moment of support, a different act of kindness. There was a bright yellow sunflower for Mrs. Thompson, who had stood with her from the beginning. A deep red rose for the group of teenagers who had spent hours designing the Stop the Eviction posters. There were daisies for the single parents who had shown up with homemade meals, ensuring Sarah's family didn't have to worry about dinner during the chaos. With every flower, Sarah poured not just soil and water, but all the emotions and gratitude she felt for the incredible support she had received. As the sun began to set, the neighbors gathered in a circle around Sarah's front yard, watching the beautiful garden take shape before their eyes. The air was thick with emotion. This wasn't just a protest, it was a testament to the strength of a united community, the power of standing together for what was right. Sarah, in that moment, wasn't just a pregnant woman fighting for her home. She was the embodiment of resilience, defiance, and community spirit. With a microphone in her hand, Sarah stood in front of the gathered crowd. The music quieted down, and the murmurs of the crowd slowly faded. She took a deep breath, her heart pounding, but her voice strong and clear as she addressed the crowd that had come to support her. "This is not just my battle," she began, her words carrying in the still evening air. "This is about all of us. It's about standing up for what's right, no matter the circumstances. We cannot allow rules and policies to overshadow human decency. We must fight for what is just and fair." Sarah's eyes glistened with tears, but they weren't tears of defeat. They were tears of pride, of hope, and of strength. "I may be leaving this house, but I will never leave the heart of this community. You are all my family, and no matter where I go, I will carry the love and support you have shown me." The crowd erupted in applause, and for a brief moment, Sarah allowed herself to savor the victory. It wasn't a victory won in a courtroom or on the pages of a legal document. It was a victory of heart, of unity, and of standing together against something unjust. The HOA had been watching. They had underestimated the power of Sarah's resolve and the power of the community she had united. As the evening unfolded and news of the event spread like wildfire through social media, the HOA began to feel the pressure. The protests, the media coverage, the outpouring of support, each wave was stronger than the last. The impact of Sarah's final move was undeniable. The HOA realized that their rigid rules and their cold approach to dealing with residents weren't just hurting one individual, they were tearing apart the very fabric of the community. In the face of such overwhelming public backlash and the strength of a united neighborhood, the HOA had no choice but to back down. They reversed their decision, allowing Sarah and her family to stay in their home. Not only that, but they were forced to review and revise their policies, making them more compassionate and human-centered. The community's pushback had worked. It was a triumph of people power, of standing up for what was right, no matter how insurmountable the odds seemed. Sarah didn't just get to keep her home, she had won something far more valuable. She had changed the course of the HOA's policies and made it clear that community, compassion, and fairness should always take precedence over cold, heartless rules. Her final act of defiance had set a new precedent, reminding everyone that sometimes the most powerful acts of resistance don't come from fighting back with anger, they come from fighting back with love, unity, and resilience. Sarah's story became an inspiration to many. It showed that, no matter how powerful the system, the strength of a community united in justice could bring about real change. The HOA had underestimated Sarah's resolve, but they learned a valuable lesson: never underestimate the power of the people when they stand together for what's right.